Welcome, everyone. This is Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and it's my pleasure to invite you to this special event, Technology and Pandemics. Today, we're hosting one of my favorite voices, and really one of my favorite people in the global technology space, His Excellency Omar Al-Olama, the UAE's Minister for Artificial Intelligence. He wears a great many hats, other hats as well, and his knowledge of emerging technologies is broad and it's deep, and we'll come back to that in a minute. He's been a key figure in developing the UAE's fourth industrial revolution strategy, promoting the UAE status as a global hub, not only for technology, but many other things, while also creating a national economy based on knowledge, innovation, and future technologies. We're going to be talking about what technologies are most important in addressing this pandemic, what we've learned about technology during this period of time, but we'll go beyond that to what overall impact he thinks, the minister thinks, this period could have on technological change, and what are some of the crucial questions we need to be asking. This is one of the first events of our brand new Geotech Center. It's going to be focused on the global impacts of a host of new technologies that are at the same time quite promising, but also potentially disruptive in positive and negative ways. We are laser-like focused on championing new technologies and data initiatives that benefit people, prosperity, and peace. Thus, the hashtag for this event, and you're going to see this hashtag a lot more at the Atlantic Council, and it's hashtag good tech choices, Geotech Center, GTC, good tech choices, GTC. We're streaming live on Facebook, on my Twitter account, on the Atlantic Council's Twitter account. We're also, of course, on Zoom. We'll open up for questions. If you put your cursor around the bottom, a lot of you have already become very expert at Zoom. You'll see the Q&A. That's where I'll look for those questions from all of you. So not from the chat box where you can chat with each other, but in the Q&A box where I'll be looking for your questions. The new director of the Geotech Center is up on your screen right now, and he'll be back to close this session. David Bray, he's got a rich background in computer science and biology. He's definitely the right choice for these times, having been involved at government level with post 9/11 responses to everything from anthrax to SARS and other outbreaks, also some time on the ground in Afghanistan. He has another skill useful for these times, and that's that he's an improvisational jazz pianist. And we have learned that improvisation is one of those skills that's pretty useful right now. So before we get into some of the tech questions, Mr. Minister, I wonder if you could, I already know you personally. We've had you at a off-record dinner in DC. You introduced at our awards dinner in New York your friend Will.i.am for a Global Citizenship Award. And we've had you at a private event with Kai-Fu Lee, another one of the great tech thinkers. But this audience doesn't know you. So I wonder if you could start by talking about how you became, I think, the first and the only Minister for Artificial Intelligence, a little bit about your background and what your responsibilities are.
Thank you, Fred. It's an absolute pleasure and honor being on this call today. And again, congratulations on the Geotech Center. There is no more important technology and geography go hand in hand, and as well how technology plays a role in shaping the future of governments and the future of our livelihoods as individuals as well. I did have the pleasure of spending many hours with you during our meetings discussing both technology and policy as well. And just for the record, since we're talking on the record right now, you tend to have these discussions with me, and we tend to have these moderated discussions when I'm jet lagged in the US. So I'm glad that this time we're able to have this discussion while I'm at my full cognitive ability, hopefully. Now, with regards to why I was appointed and why this position was created, the government of the United Arab Emirates, the leadership in the UAE, believed before my appointment that there were new shifts of change that are going to reshape economies, they're going to reshape societies, and also reshape governments. And wanted to understand how we can move from an economy that today is, yes, moving away from oil, but still oil contributes a big amount to our GDP, and many of the jobs created are jobs in the oil industry and industries related to oil as well. The endeavor led to both the Prime Minister, Vice President, Prime Minister, and ruler of Dubai, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who is the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, coming together and discussing what are the sectors that we're going to focus on to create the new economy of the UAE, and what are the sectors that we want to be among the leaders in within the next 50 years. And one of these sectors was artificial intelligence, as discussed by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and as well endorsed by the Prime Minister and the ruler of Dubai. So before my appointment, the UAE set a very ambitious strategy, which was to become one of the global leaders in artificial intelligence by 2031. We will continue our 50-year jubilee in 2021, so next year. And by the time that we achieve that, hopefully, we'll be 60 years old as a country. So younger than many people around the world. But when that was put in place, the leadership believed that we needed to look at artificial intelligence not just as a technology, but as a tool that can be used to improve the lives of people, to create jobs, and also something that would be used for good rather than for bad. So if you look at the applications or even the sectors that we're focusing on healthcare, which, as we've seen right now with the COVID pandemic, is a crucial sector for us to keep focusing and investing in. We're looking at minerals and resources, so oil and gas and all the sectors that today serve a big portion of our income as a country. We're looking at infrastructure. As you know, we spend a lot on infrastructure in the UAE. We're also looking at education and tourism as well, because education, since we want to dominate this field, we will not be able to dominate it unless we have people who are educated in the field and are able to lead in research and development. In tourism, because today we wanted to also improve the sectors that we are leading in by deploying artificial intelligence and maintaining our leadership position. And finally, being a global hub that connects East and West through trade. Logistics is a very important sector for us as well to try to be amongst the leaders using artificial intelligence in. Our main focus here through the artificial intelligence strategy is BRAIN. We have a guiding North Star, which we call BRAIN, which stands for, it's an acronym that stands for Building a Responsible Artificial Intelligence Nation. Most countries actually look at artificial intelligence as something that they're going to deploy without thinking of the long-term impacts, without thinking of the repercussions of deploying AI. We want to ensure that any deployment, any partnerships, any use case of artificial intelligence is something that will lead to sustainable and long-term positive impacts, even for future generations. So it's not something that's just going to benefit the Emiratis of today, but all Emiratis, and also something that other countries can follow the lead in, or at least work with us on. And a big portion of my job is to put the right policies and regulations to govern this technology in the rightful manner, not to hinder innovation, but to ensure that innovation can continue and prosper while protecting the livelihoods of people, and also working and collaborating with countries that are allies of the United Arab Emirates, like the United States of America, like the UK, like Europe and others, to ensure that we can all come together and develop this technology in a way that is homogeneous and fruitful for everyone, rather than wait for it to go wrong in one country and then come and harm us in the UAE or harm other countries if it goes wrong in the UAE. We see right now what's happening with COVID. It started somewhere and then came to all of our countries. Because of the digital connected nature of our world today, if this does go wrong in one place, we will see detrimental impacts on countries everywhere. So we are all for collaborating, cooperating, and shaping this together. That's my remit as a minister in the government. I think you're on mute, Fred.
I was seeing some feedback. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Minister. That was a great opening. Another personal question. I hope you don't mind asking this, but you're the only cabinet ranked person I've ever known that went to go serve his military service. So just before the outbreak of COVID, you were with the ranks. You were with the troops. Briefly, how did that come about, and what did you learn from military service?
Thank you for asking this question. I don't know how it's related to pandemics and the military. And,
we'll come back to the pandemic.
We will come back to that topic, yes. Honestly, Fred, within the UAE, one of the laws or regulations here is that every male that is under the age of 30 needs to serve in the military at a point in his life before hitting 30. So I hit 30 this year, and I was drafted and enrolled into the military. To be extremely frank and honest, it was such a life-changing experience. Although I expected to go there and to be the person that knows it all, the person that actually would teach everyone a lot of things in the military as well, just because of the exposure that I have talking to different individuals and doing different things that most people my age are not able to experience. But it turned out to be such a enlightening and a spiritual experience, because I did see that every person can start in a new environment and learn a lot. I also was able to see all the blessings that we are lucky to have. That today we're able to live in this prosperous country. We're able to have the education that we have, and we're able to live the lives that we have. And then finally, that all of this means nothing if you can't protect it. And if you really are a person that wants to see your country continue to thrive and prosper, then you must be willing to do everything it takes to continue protecting this development and ensuring that it is something that you can safeguard for future generations. I think that every single person that should at some point experience the military life for themselves, whether it's a man or woman, and that it centers you differently than most other experiences. It shows you how to be disciplined. It shows you how to work in a unit, regardless of who is with you. Because, in work, sometimes you can choose your team, you can choose your colleagues, you can choose your friends. But in the military, you don't get to choose who's with you. You all need to work together to save each other. You all need to work together to ensure that your country is safeguarded. And then finally, it also shows you that you should not live by feeling like you can just waste the food that you have or waste the wealth that you have and live with ignorance in that regard. It's very important for you to try to understand that everything you have today is something that is a blessing, and you need to safeguard, as well as something that might not necessarily stay forever. So you always need to work hard and diligently to keep it.
Mr. Minister, thank you so much for sharing that. The one thing we've learned at the Atlantic Council, we've been very busy. We've been at telework for 4 weeks, and the team has really responded to this well. But what we've learned is that it's not really social distance. It's physical distance, but we're becoming, in some respects, closer together socially. So thank you for answering these personal questions. Now, let me start, before we get into some of the broader questions of technological change. I think it's not generally known where the UAE stands in terms of the response to COVID-19. And I was talking to another member of your government, and I learned that you have had, in a country of just under 10 million population, you've had 579,000 tests already out. By the end of this month, you're going to have 2 million by the end of April. So talk a little bit about what you've learned through this process. It sounds like you were pretty well prepared for this. I don't know how anyone can be prepared for what just came at us, but you were. And then where you stand in your national response and how you see this in terms of international response.
Thank you for that one. Just to put things into perspective, if we're going to talk about how a country ramps up testing, 4 days ago, the UAE was around 22,000 tests per million population, compared to the US, which was around 5.4 thousand per million population. And I think the second highest country on earth was Italy at around 11 0.5 thousand tests per million people.
And
now,
so in terms of testing per capita, you're number one in the world at the moment.
Yes, yes. And that was significantly ramped up and will continuously be ramped up as well over the course of the month or two that are going to come up. Just because we do believe that if you have the right testing, if you have the right mechanisms in place, you're able to overcome this challenge that everyone is facing today. If you think about COVID-19, it is not a pandemic as a standalone thing. It's also a war that we're facing against an enemy that we can't see. And collectively, as humans, we all need to work together, regardless of our countries, regardless of our political affiliations, regardless of whether we are on the east or the west, to try to combat this everywhere. Because of the nature of the globalized world that we live in, if this is not overcome everywhere, then we still have an issue moving forward. If you look at what the UAE has done over the last 5 years, we've focused a lot on forecasting the future. Our Minister of Cabinet Affairs has also been given the task to also be the Minister of the Future. Our Sovereign Wealth Fund has invested a lot in many different entities and also entities that are focusing on biotech and focusing in genomics and other technologies as well that are up and coming that were not proven at the time. The reason being is because our leadership believed that we need to be prepared for everything and that we need to focus on waiting for the black swan to happen, and when it does happen, we can also help other countries. You've seen the UAE's response when it comes to the medical kits that we have and the face masks and the testing kits as well. The UAE has exported aid in terms of kits to the US, to Europe, to Italy, for example, and even to adversaries like Iran, because we really care about trying to overcome this pandemic everywhere, regardless of what we believe about the political regime in the country or what that country stands for, or even if we had any differences in the past. The other thing is, when it comes to combating COVID-19, what makes the UAE different to many other countries is the fact that we have 200 nationalities living on our soil, which is very different to a country like Italy that has a very homogeneous population, or even China. When you have people that have different cultural backgrounds, when you have people that have different educational backgrounds as well living in the country, that to some is an equation for disaster. But the way that the government here dealt with this issue is it went, and the first comment that was made by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, at the time of the start of COVID, was that we're going to protect everyone here, whether it's locals or non-locals, residents or tourists, and we're going to ensure that we can all come out of this in the best way possible. And we're not going to, we're going to spend anything that needs to be spent or do anything that needs to be done to ensure that everyone is safeguarded. The thing that was asked in return is that you just follow the requirements of social distancing, of at times staying at home, and also buying only what you need, even though the retail outlets are actually filled with everything that a person can buy. So we don't have, thankfully, the issues with regards to people running out of toilet paper, running out of food, etc. And that all came because of prior planning. An example of that, specifically in the food and the retail element, is a few years back, the government has decreed that every retailer in the country needs to have an emergency reserve of 4 months at least in its stocks and warehouses. So today, even though we do have a lot of imports coming in from other countries, the reserves we have are enough to sustain 4 months without anything coming in. And because of the good diplomatic relations with many countries, we're also able to import from countries if need be. So it's all about really planning for the future, trying to forecast, and putting the right investments to ensure that these pandemics or these issues don't hit you hard.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for that answer. I'm going to intersperse our own conversation with questions that we're getting by Zoom, and I'll be watching for other questions that we're getting also through other channels. There's a question from an international lawyer named Kemal Unal asking, do you think that artificial intelligence is being used sufficiently to combat the coronavirus in the UAE, and I would say more generally as well? And is the corporate sector being cooperative enough in this venture Also, I think that touches on something the Geotech Center is trying to focus on, which is data for good, not just technology for good, but data for good. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I know that I need to reflect the positive side of technology as a person in my role, but I think it's also important for us to differentiate between the hype and the reality. Technology does have a lot of good that can come out of it, but there's a lot of hype as well when it comes to technology that is being shared by people with regards to how technology can be used to change our lives and to also overcome certain pandemics. The challenge with artificial intelligence, as anyone who's working in this field knows, is it's a challenge of historical data. All right, if you have historical data, you can really deploy AI to do a lot of things. But if you don't, then there is a challenge of actually creating an algorithm that is able to give you the output that you want. There's another side of this coin, which is where technology is useful when it comes to pandemics. And I would say it's probably in the tracing and in the testing side of things. In the curing side of things, I don't think that this technology, specifically artificial intelligence, is there yet, but there will be a lot more investments going in to using AI to be able to decipher the COVID virus and then move forward towards finding a cure. So there are people trying to deploy that, but I don't think that that's going to be realistic in the near term. Probably after this pandemic, a lot more investment is going to go there. When it comes to using AI, for example, there are different approaches here. You have the Chinese approach where your whole life depends on technology based on the apps that you have on your phone, whether it's WeChat or Alipay or the other apps that you use. And you can then use artificial intelligence to understand people's social circles, to understand where they've been, to understand how likely it is that they actually got exposed to COVID, and also use the tool itself to make people refrain from going out or make people refrain from getting in touch with others forcefully. That works for the Chinese, but it's not a model that would work with everyone else, because the Chinese have spent so much investment in creating the infrastructure necessary. Since you don't have a choice of using that app or not using that app, it's worked effectively. But in other countries, namely the US, for example, Europe, or in many other countries as well, there is this challenge of applying the Chinese model because we don't have the digital infrastructure necessary. So whether it's AI or any other tool, it's going to be a lot more difficult. You have the surveillance side of using AI and other technologies and means, or big data, for example, to try to combat COVID. But in the surveillance aspect, there is a chance of alienating citizens. There's also a chance of people using the loopholes to overcome the system, whether it's leaving their phones at home or using cash-only payments when it comes to surveying their payment methodologies through credit cards, etc. So there's always a loophole when it comes to technology. I do completely believe that technology is a tool. If we use it in the right manner and people are educated for why the technology is being used, and the decision makers are following the advice, but are aware as well with about the shortcomings of the technology, then you can overcome this. But the solution for this pandemic is not going to be AI. AI might play a role in trying to reduce the spread, or it might play a role in simulating how this is going to play out. But the social decisions, the collective societal decisions that we take, as well as traditional in nature that are put in place, are what's going to happen.
Thank you for that, Mr. Minister. We just lost you for a second there. I just want to make sure we still have you with us.
I'm with you. Sorry, I don't know where you lost me.
No, I think you're back. Great. Thank you very much for that. In our conversations, you've actually talked about that a lot. We've talked a lot about technologies that are living up to their promise, technologies that aren't, technologies as tools. Maybe you could talk about one or two of these. Facial recognition as one we've talked about before. Which of the technologies do you think is not living up to its promise? Which do you think is?
If we're going to look at technologies in general, then I do believe that, for example, blockchain today isn't living up to its promise. There's a lot that we can do with blockchain, probably in the financial sector, but it's not the one technology that's going to spread across every sector yet. And there needs to be a lot of work done there, for example. If we're going to look at artificial intelligence can do a lot in advertising, for example, digital advertising, in trying to crunch huge amounts of data about individuals and try to decipher their personalities and then allow you to nudge them in certain directions, which is something that is quite controversial and certain countries are trying to overcome with the policies that they put in place. And you also have the facial recognition aspect of AI when it comes to identifying a person within a crowd. Does have some good use cases and some bad use cases as well. But all of these emerging technologies today have not yet lived to the promise of being all serving or all beneficial, right? And there are still so many challenges when you look at bias of the data, when you look at even the training data that was given to these systems and their abilities, they're still not able to do what is being promised at this point. And if they are able to do that, then there's always a catch. So if we talk about artificial intelligence, namely, there is a catch with regards to the data centers that are needed to fuel these huge amounts of data that require a lot of energy, that require a big amount of money being spent if you want to have something really meaningful when it comes to training this algorithm. But hypothetically, if we say that we're able to overcome that, and I think we will be able to overcome that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will reach a point where you'll be able to create one algorithm in one place and then export it everywhere and keep improving it. And that's where I think the promise of technology is. So it's a matter of time when it comes to these technologies. It's not a matter of whether or not they're good or bad. It's not a matter of whether they're hype or reality. It's what the time frame looks like for it to be able to become what we are hoping for it to become. And we tend to add the gaps of our knowledge when it comes to technology by imagining what it can do. So let me give you a simple example of some of the videos that I've been getting on this whole COVID issue. Some people have been sending me videos of drones being used to spray, sanitary gases or sanitary liquids, and robots as well. And the first question that comes to mind is, how big is the tank that's actually holding that liquid, and how far can it last? Like, it needs to be refilled every few minutes, and it's still not better than having a person just spray left, right, and above him, because technology today still has a lot of issues with regards to what it's able to do. But as we go on, the same way that we were able to create drones, whereas in the past it was quite difficult for us to create something that can carry a payload and fly with the same maneuvering ability of a drone, we will be able to create solutions for the problems that we have today. But don't look at these technologies as the all-serving tool that can overcome pandemics or overcome COVID today. I think maybe when we come out of this, hopefully, we'll be able to use these tools to try to safeguard us from another one happening. So, to crunch all of the data necessary to understand where the next pandemic can come from, where investments should go, what are the weak points when it comes to our cells and our DNA as individuals, how we can protect ourselves as well. And I think the amount of money that's going to go into biotech coming out of COVID is going to be a lot bigger than the amount of money that was in biotech prior, because today we've seen that healthcare is more important than politics and is more important than the economy as well. If there's a healthcare issue, both the political landscape, it comes to its knees, and also the economic landscape comes to its knees with it.
What a fascinating answer. Thank you, Mr. Minister. And as you mentioned, bio, perhaps we can build on something I've heard you talk about in a different setting, which is what keeps you up late at night as a person who looks at all these disruptive technologies. Well, let me just leave it there and make it a more open-ended question.
So I don't mean to be a fearmonger, and I don't mean to keep people up at night. But I think the first time you asked me this question, Fred, was probably 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I said, the fear that I have is that biotech is not regulated enough, and that we will reach a point where someone can create a pandemic in his garage and it will bring the whole world to a standstill. And I don't want to peddle conspiracy theories here because I do believe that conspiracy theories don't have much evidence behind them and don't have much science backing them. But if anything, this whole COVID crisis has shown us that we need to invest a lot in regulating biotech. Because this time, what we've seen right now is a sneak peek of what's to come if this is not regulated and if this is not governed. And if these viruses can be tweaked and changed in laboratories, and if we can make them more deadly or less deadly, then there is a big challenge that's on the horizon and a tsunami that's really going to not just make us work on social distancing, but make us fear for our lives. There's another thing right now that actually keeps me up at night, and we discussed this as well previously, which is if we look at the nature of viruses, viruses are mutating, nature, and every virus either becomes more deadly or becomes less deadly and more viral. The more deadly it becomes, the more likely that it's going to die within a short period of time because it's going to kill the carrier that's carrying this virus, and it's going to be the end of it. And if it becomes less deadly, then it's just going to become like the common cold or the flu, and we're going to overcome that specific virus. But when we look at, for example, drug-resistant bacteria and bacteria that is antibiotic resistant, we do have a big challenge, and it's on the horizon. It's looming right now. So what's keeping me up at night is why we're not investing enough to overcome that challenge, because the nature of bacteria is that it doesn't evolve, and we do have a head start right now. We need to increase our investment, and we need to create a global coalition to ensure that these pandemics are not something that will disrupt our lives moving forward. I read a very interesting article today that talked about how George Bush was actually fearing a pandemic in 2005 and created a whole task force to look at and overcome pandemics. So, there have been people talking about this for many years. It's just that the action that was reflected based on the warnings that we've been getting are not as for what is required at this point.
You're right. That was a very interesting piece. George W. Bush read a book on the Spanish flu and came down and saw his national security advisor for these issues, Fran Townsend, who was a member of our board, and said, we need to go to work on this. And she said, but Mr. President, there's nothing happening right now. This would be billions of dollars to put this kind of infrastructure in place. And he says, I don't care. It's my responsibility as president to get there. So you're absolutely right on that story. And let me drill down on that just a little bit further. This whole idea, what we've seen is a sneak peek of what's to come, very well said. The idea of a global coalition. Talk to me a little bit more how this global coalition would look like, because you have in the G20, G7 aspects looking at the economic side of things. We have with OPEC and other International Energy Agency, but for whatever reason, we haven't had this public coalition, public health coalition. How would that look? And then secondarily, and I've discussed this with David Bray, do we need to consider using data, AI, Internet of Things to build essentially a global immune system that can detect unknown pathogens, sequence them, and quickly share that data? Is that within the realm of what's possible in technology?
So, Mr. Minister, would you like to go first, or would you like me to? I think this is a great question that Fred asked.
To you, David.
Okay. So Fred, I definitely think, that the time is now, and if not, the time was actually probably 10 years ago, but the time is now to bring together a coalition that does look at the technologies associated with being able to detect pathogens in the air, in the water, in soil, and have a way of rapidly, one, detecting if this pathogen is new or novel, and then two, take it to the next stage, which is start to sequence it. With COVID-19, for example, we have right now some unanswered questions in terms of how much is genetic drift. And by genetic drift, I mean, how much is the virus itself mutating? And if it is mutating at a high rate, is it a case where having one case of COVID-19 of a strain will give you immunity to future strains, or will you still get sick, and will it be more of a mild case or something more severe? So yes, one could imagine one could use data and AI, one could use biosensors, sort of like how we sort of, unfortunately the internet was not a global effort, even though it became a global creation, but the ideas behind the internet at the time were bold and audacious. We need something similar that brings together coalitions across nations as well as across sectors and companies to say what would be the architecture of at least having the ability to detect new and novel pathogens, then start to sequence them, and from there, try to figure out interventions or therapies to address that.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Fred. If we look at the way that we're living our lives right now, we're living in such a golden age when it comes to humanity, that we're able to travel everywhere, we're able to access everything with a click of a button, and we're so interconnected as a species, more than any time throughout history. And if we want to retain that, and if we want to safeguard that, the only thing we can do is actually invest more in overcoming these pandemics, because these are the only tools that can be used to end globalization as we know it, and to create these borders and these isolationist or draconian measures that we're seeing right now. And that being said, there's also another challenge that's also looming on the horizon when it comes to that specifically. As you see the ice caps melt, as we see the global warming and climate change actually change the nature of the planet as we know it, we will see a lot of viruses and pandemics that have died or have been buried underground for thousands of years or millions of years in Siberia or in Alaska or in Antarctica as well, come back and be more widespread. There is a small chance, but that is something that's going to happen. And no country can say that it's not going to affect me, because today, sometimes when it comes to these pandemics, specifically like COVID-19, a pandemic can start somewhere, it can reside and incubate itself in your body for a few days and then come out after that by X number of days and really show the symptoms. So there are ways for these viruses and these pandemics to spread even beyond the borders that we think we have. And that being said, there needs to be more investment to go towards research in this matter, to go towards finding cures, and as well to go towards trying to find a cure for these things before they actually become such a viral pandemic. So, when China, for example, found the first cases of COVID-19, the first thing that should have happened is the whole world should have come together and tried to come and find a cure for this. And there needed to be as much transparency and as much communication as possible to ensure that every single day is a day gained rather than a day lost. And what we're seeing today is every day that we lose in terms of reactions leads to thousands of deaths, leads to detrimental economic impact because of the number of days that you need to have in terms of closure and quarantining and lockdown to overcome this. And finally, it also leads to social unrest and political tensions, because people feel like they were cheated, or they feel like they could have had a better, bet when it comes to that, and that they could have overcome it. So I don't think it's a matter of politics anymore. The same way that we have a disarmament treaty, the same way that we have certain global treaties talking about, the weapons of mass destruction or weapons of chemical warfare and others, there needs to be a global task force focused on ensuring that these things do not come out, and if they do, that they don't spread, and that we all work together transparently, because it's in no one's good interest to see this come out later on or anytime in the coming years.
Mr. Minister, that's just such a terrific answer. Let me give you one other question that's come through across Zoom. It's from Kimberly Mullen. And this gets to a question that I know you've given a lot of thought to, which is thinking globally and ethically about second-order consequences of AI. How do you balance your objective of wanting to build something responsible with nations that may not hold that same objective, meaning other nations that may not care as much about building and deploying AI around the world in a manner that's responsible? This again gets to the notion of global approaches, global rules, global ethics. the Minister for AI, what are your views on this?
So the first portion of this answer would be that we can never overcome this challenge if we isolate certain players and say that they don't do what we think is right and that they shouldn't have a seat on the table. I do fundamentally believe that even if you don't look eye to eye with a person and believe what they believe, it's important for you to have a dialogue wherein maybe with the right, convincing arguments or with the right evidence, they will lean towards what you're leaning towards and try to join you in terms of your endeavor to overcome this. With regards to how we're approaching this, is we are not putting any barriers when it comes to addressing the issue of having responsible AI and working towards AI that's going to serve us all in a way that does not allow us to serve it in the long term. We're seeing the impact of AI today affect the livelihood of countries. So you see AI influencing politics in certain countries. I don't want to name any countries because of being on the record, but you have seen, for example, certain social media platforms wield the power to influence people's decisions when it comes to voting. Also, for example, create genocide in other countries wherein people who are able to overcome or understand how to use these algorithms are able to push content that make people, for example, revolt against a certain portion of the society and other things as well. And finally, also allow us to take decisions or make us take decisions that even harm us on an individual level, whether it's increasing our spending on things that we don't want to spend on or forcing us to take decisions that might not necessarily reflect positively on us and our ethos or what we believe in. And that goes back to the point of where have the governments been to overcome this and to put the right checks and balances to ensure that this is something that serves everyone rather than causes this harm. The other thing is we see that artificial intelligence has developed, for example, in the US, impacts people in the UAE, and artificial intelligence that's developed in China impacts people in Europe because of the digital landscape that we have that's so connected and that's so intertwined. So the only way forward is for us to have a dialogue. And the only way forward is for us to also hear every side of the argument and try to find a consensus that meets all of our expectations. Certain countries believe that having or possessing nuclear weapons is a positive thing to ensure that you can defend your country and to safeguard your livelihood. But you won't be able to convince them that that's not a good approach until you actually sit with them and hear their point and give them alternatives. We are a country that is not known to develop technology. So when we come to work with these countries, when we come to import as well, we ensure that one of the points that are added there is that we want to have a dialogue with you. And that's why some of the agreements that we've been signing with certain countries are called AI bridges. So a bridge is a bridge that takes you to a place and also brings you back. We've signed an AI bridge with India, for example. We've signed an AI bridge with South Korea, with certain European countries, and as well as certain African and Eastern Asian countries as well. Because what we believed was if we have a bridge, we'll be able to incorporate the best of their use cases of AI and as well reflect our best use cases from the UAE, and then try to come up with a solution that meets their expectations and ours. And we've been having something called the Global Governance of Artificial Intelligence Forum take place in the UAE yearly that brings in ministers of ICT or ministers of innovation, ministers that work in the domains that are responsible for AI, and allow us to discuss candidly and openly and what are the shortcomings and the shortfalls and the benefits of using them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. So just to show you how global and local one can be on one of these, I'll draw out one more question. There's a lot on AI. I want to come back to another issue after this question. But this is from Ahmed Matar in Dubai. And his question to the minister, how can airlines and aviation play a role in AI and contribute to being an important player in the field? He identifies himself as an airline manager at Emirates Airline.
Well, thank you for that question, Ahmed. And we all miss Emirates Airlines. Hopefully, we'll be on an airplane soon and getting that beautiful sensation of riding Emirates and hearing the music in the background as well. One of the most forward-thinking, I think, sectors when it comes to artificial intelligence was the airline industry. If we think of autopilot, technically, autopilot is a artificial intelligence algorithm that's able to take in all the different variables, whether it's the radar that's guiding it, whether it's weather forecasts, whether it's the optimal route, and control the airplane in such a manner that ensures that you reach your destination safely without the pilot actually interfacing directly with it the whole time. I think that industry itself as well has a lot of use cases for AI that can be used. And also probably an even bigger domain of RPA, which is robotics process automation, that can save money, that can improve the way that business is done, and also can ensure that the profit margins that they have are higher. I'll give you a few examples. Emirates and other airlines as well spend a lot of money on cleaning airplanes, spend a lot of money on painting airplanes as well, or repainting airplanes, and as well on the servicing part of it. And I do believe with RPA and with some AI, we'll be able to automate this whole task to ensure that these tasks can be done a lot more efficiently, that you can actually save a lot of the costs and the man hours necessary there, and you can free up your engineers and the people that you have to other jobs that are a lot more laborious and a lot more difficult. Because painting or washing the airplane should not be a very difficult task for the right mechanisms of robotics and AI to be able to do that without having any human intervene there. You also have the whole supply chain that comes behind the flight, right? Whether it's the catering, the luggage, etc. I don't think that if we do it right, I don't think that there needs to be a human in the loop there. That you can have a fully automated system that is able to dispatch and deploy and also ensure that all of this logistics is done properly. There needs to be trial and error. It's not going to be right from the first instance. But the more that we test this and the more that we invest in AI, the better it's going to be. Then if we're going to look at Emirates Airlines and Dubai Airport in specific, there is the whole notion of using the picture on your passport and using facial recognition to ensure that you are the document that gets you on the airplane. So you don't need to showcase your passport. You don't need to take out any documents. You can just walk through the security, walk through the airport and get on the airplane at ease. Also, if you think about artificial intelligence, you can use that in terms of ticket sales to ensure that you can sell more tickets and increase your revenue as well. And then finally, a good friend of mine, and I think he's also a good friend of yours, Fred, Alam Bajani, was having a conversation with me a few days back, and we were talking about the future of retail. And he said that he believes that the future of retail is going to be experiential retail. And you can't really have proper experiential retail if you don't deploy AI in a manner that takes in the feedback and takes in the data and helps you keep improving it with time, because experiences are things that need to continue to evolve. You can't have the same quality experience continuously unless the system itself is able to keep improving with your expectations that keep increasing. You can do that with airlines as well. Using AI, you can ensure that the person's experience in flying and the person's experience in getting from point A to point B is the best that it can be. And you can retain more loyal customers. You can then also ensure that your profits compared to other competitors are much higher.
So thank you, Mr. Minister. So we're down to our last 10 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question here. I hope David Bray will join us as well, because I think he may ask a question or two and then lead up to our close. A lot of people are talking about what might permanently change through this period. Geopolitically, geoeconomically, let's focus on technologically. So a lot of people are involved in different education schemes, the future of work. What do you think we're learning through this period? What do you think might be some of the longer lasting and more permanent changes in the technological sense that could grow out of this period?
I think if we did a survey, Fred, that asked people who was responsible for the digital transformation of your entity today, most people are going to say not the CEO or the CTO, it's probably COVID-19, because it forced many sectors to go digital even before they thought that they were ready for it. And, historically, we've always been reluctant for change. So, when it comes to virtual education, for example, people were very wary of going towards offering virtual classes for example, and if you think about healthcare as well, telemedicine was something that's always there, something that we can use, but not used efficiently or effectively. And then finally, when it comes to retail, for example, I mentioned Alan there, the whole experience of buying things online, not everyone was signed up for that, and not everyone experienced that. What COVID did was it forced us to experience another side of life, wherein we don't have an excuse to say we haven't experienced virtual education. Now, every single person who's being educated in any institution on earth has gone through virtual education, not for a day, not for a week, but for a month or months on end so far, right? And what that's going to lead to is a big disruption in the education sector, because some schools and some universities are going to say it's going to be a lot more efficient if we just offer courses online. It's going to be a lot less costly, and we can actually ensure that the outcomes are as good as people coming in physically, because we've tested this in the COVID era and we've found that there are certain benefits and certain challenges that we can overcome if we put in the right investment. You then have the retail aspect, wherein every person today, and I don't know when was the last time that you went to go shopping for anything, but since this whole pandemic started, we were forced to experience life without shopping or going to retail outlets physically. And if you ask even my grandmother or an older or a younger person, they're going to tell you today that it's a much more convenient experience to shop online and to get it delivered to your doorstep instead of going there, swiping a credit card and carrying all these bags with you back home, and having to figure it out when you go back home how you carry stuff back inside and so on and so forth. So I think there are certain sectors that are not going to be the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you think about education, I think education required disruption, but we never had an excuse to disrupt it. And everyone was reluctant to change the agriculture era education method that we have today, which is 40 people sitting behind each other in the classroom and having one teacher speak to them, and doing it in such an inefficient manner from a cost perspective, right? And today, this was the shift, and this was the push that we required. When it comes to retail, I do believe that many retail outlets are going to become experiential retail outlets. And those who are able to disrupt themselves and nudge themselves in that direction are going to be the ones that gain the most in the future that is to come. And when it comes to healthcare as well, I think countries are now going to understand that their focus should not be in investing just on healthcare in general. There needs to be different levels of segmentation of healthcare delivery. Certain, telemedicine applications are going to be invested in and are going to be pushed a lot more moving forward. I think for minor, colds or flus or fevers, so on and so forth, there is going to be a lot of applications where you get your diagnosis through the phone. You will also get a prescription, for example, on your email, and you can have it delivered to your home without you needing to go and wait for hours at the hospital and putting a bottleneck or a backlog there in terms of people who actually require the critical healthcare. And then finally, one other thing that's going to happen, which I think is going to be critical, is the fact that we're going to be thinking more modularly when it comes to the different sectors. Having seen, for example, the sight of seeing tents being put up in Central Park to treat the cases of COVID-19, you ask yourself, this concrete jungle that has so many buildings, that has so many different structures that can actually house the people that require treatment, is the perfect example of a city that can actually accommodate them and become modular. But because we've never planned on modularity, because we've never put the right policies for that, because we've never thought of that, we've never actually created the right infrastructure to be able to do that. But moving forward, that is going to be the essence of everything that is being built and everything that is being put together.
Mr. Minister, these are all such fascinating and thought-provoking answers. I'm sorry I'm not going to get to all questions, but I'd really like to pass to, and what we'll do is we'll try to get some of your questions answered later by text. But let me pass to David Bray to bring this home with you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Mr. Minister. Again, this has been a truly inspiring conversation, and I've really enjoyed how you sketched out how COVID-19 is going to leave the world changed, and we need to start thinking now about specifically the technology and data ripples that will then have social and economic impacts. And so, as a closing question, recognizing that you know and you are a strong supporter of the Geotech Center and our mission on how do new technologies and data benefit people, prosperity, and peace globally, what would be your recommendation for us at the Atlantic Council as we look forward to try and help bring together folks that are world leaders from the public sector, world leaders from the private sector, and even members of the public globally, and recognizing our motto is stronger together? What would be your recommendation as to how we can provide the best value in this changing technology and data landscape to try and make sure we produce a world that's more strong and resilient after we emerge from COVID-19?
Thank you, David, for that question. And it's been a pleasure being on this call, honestly. To conclude and to answer your question, David, one thing that the world needs right now is a entity or a forum wherein all different perspectives are bridged and the greater good prevails. We've seen how the trade war has panned out, and how certain parties, was talking to the whole world saying you're either with me or against me, with regards to how you're siding with different countries on this. And the whole COVID-19 issue came up, and we've seen that the novel coronavirus was able to really bring countries to their knees and force us to forget everything about the trade war. And today, no one's even talking about the trade war. No one's even thinking about it, because the economic repercussions of this was so much bigger than any trade war that any 2 countries or 10 countries could have had. And to an extent, even in certain instances, it's being compared to the Great Depression, it's being compared to World War II, and it's being compared to the worst things that we've gone through as a humanity, right? So I think that it is the right time for us to have a center or an entity that becomes this bridging entity that helps us work on what is going to create solutions for the common good, and also ensure that we understand the different perspectives. We tend to, as humans, judge others that are unlike us, and we tend to feel like whoever is not like us is alien to us. But the Atlantic Council, I think, is there to serve the best interest of humanity, not just the best interest of the US, although I know that the US is important to you. But we need to focus on what can be done to ensure that we don't come back here. And come back here not just from a pandemic perspective. Pandemics are important for us to combat, but there are so many alternative future scenarios that we need to look at that today are blindsiding us. So they're black swans that we're not even thinking about. And if you remember, Fred, one of the first discussions we had was when you said, what keeps you up at night? And then you asked me the same question as well of what, Geotech Center or the Atlantic Council should do. And I said, you guys need to come with a solution for us to combat a pandemic-like scenario coming up. So this was not done in the past because of just the nature of how the world was at the time, and how we were preoccupied by different things. I think this is the right time for us to start scoping out what can go wrong, what are the flags or the things that should be looked at in terms of milestones that we're going to hit for these black swans to actually come up, and then put the right recommendations for governments and have a continuous dialogue, and as well a continuous working group that ensures that governments everywhere buy into that notion of we need to work together. Yes, we compete on an economic perspective, and that's fine. Yes, we compete to attract talent from other countries, and that's the nature of the game. But we should not compete to destroy each other. And we've lived in such an era of peace after World War II that it will be sad for us to go back to not a world war, but a world where everyone's at war with something, whether you're at war with a pandemic or you're at war with another country with regards to a trade war or a traditional war in that sense. And the only people that can actually do that are people like yourselves, people who are enlightened, people who are doing it for the right reasons, and people who have advocates like me, you, and others as well, that want to do whatever they can and their part to ensure that we leave the world better for future generations than what we've come to as a planet.
Well, inspired and honored to be working with you, and really appreciate, Minister, your great remarks today. They definitely are going to be worth a replay, because what you said here, I think, it's almost like we packed 4 hours into 1 hour. So thank you very much for this very truly inspiring. Fred, thank you as well for everything. And with that, we also want to thank our viewers, and for everyone who did ask questions, we will record them. We will try to get back to you through social media with some of the answers. We'll work with the minister on that. And thank you all for joining us and trying to make sure, as we go through COVID-19 together, we make sure that we get through it together stronger, more resilient, and we use technology and data for good. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.